This palace was not built from stone alone. It was built on power, fear, and betrayal. While Prince Salim was drowning himself in alcohol, and Emperor Akbar was fighting for his life, a deadly conspiracy was rising inside the Mughal court. Although Akbar had several wives, by his mid-20s he still had no surviving heir. The uncertainty began to trouble him deeply, and he started seeking guidance from holy men and spiritual figures. During this time, Akbar heard about a respected Sufi mystic named Sheikh Salim Chishti, who lived in the small town of Sikri, west of Agra. The Sufis were known for teaching a deeply personal spiritual connection with God through prayer, devotion, and mystical practice. Hoping for answers, Akbar traveled to meet the holy man. According to historical accounts, Sheikh Salim Chishti reassured the emperor that he would one day have sons. Not long after their meeting, Akbar's chief queen, the Rajput princess from Amber, became pregnant. Believing the saint's blessing would protect the child, Akbar arranged for the queen to stay near Sheikh Salim Chishti during her pregnancy. Then, on August 30, 1569, she gave birth to a son in Sikri. Akbar named the child Salim in honor of the Sufi saint. That child would later become Emperor Jahangir. Within the next few years, Akbar was blessed with two more sons, Murad and Daniel. The emperor became convinced that Sikri had brought extraordinary fortune into his life. To honor both the saint and the place connected to his long-awaited heirs, Akbar decided to move his royal capital from Agra to Sikri, where a grand new city would soon rise. The name, Fatehpur, meant City of Victory, a title chosen to celebrate Akbar's successful military campaigns in Gujarat during the early 1570s. But Fatehpur Sikri was not Akbar's first great architectural achievement. Before the city rose, one of the empire's most important projects had already been completed: the Grand Tomb of Akbar's father, Humayun, near Delhi. Its enormous garden layout, balanced design, and massive white dome would later influence the architectural style seen in the Taj Mahal. The tomb was built on a carefully planned symmetrical platform of red sandstone, surrounded by a large walled garden. White marble decorations covered the structure, while a huge central dome stood above the main entrance arch. Unlike many earlier Mughal buildings, historians believe the tomb can be connected to known Persian architects, including Sayyid Muhammad and Mirak Sayyid Ghiyas. Their influence gave the monument its Persian-style arches, geometric balance, and octagonal interior chambers. At the same time, Indian artistic elements were also included in the design. Decorative chhatras, carved details, and symbolic patterns reflected local Hindu architectural traditions blended into Mughal construction. Humayun's tomb became one of the first major structures in India to combine large amounts of red sandstone and white marble together. Many historians see this combination as a symbol of cultural fusion inside Akbar's empire. Akbar later continued rebuilding the great fortress of Agra, known today as the Red Fort, beside the Yamuna River. Still, Fatehpur Sikri remained the clearest example of his architectural vision. The city was designed as a massive fortified complex, protected by walls on several sides and natural high ground on another. Although the city followed Mughal planning principles, much of its artistic inspiration came from traditional Indian craftsmanship. Built mainly from red sandstone, the city reflected both imperial power and detailed local artistry at the same time. The city of Fatehpur Sikri was built from red sandstone, a material that could be carved with remarkable precision by skilled craftsmen. Because of this, many of the decorative patterns across the city closely resembled the detailed wood carvings traditionally seen in Indian temples. The stone also allowed builders to prepare sections of the structures in advance before transporting them to the construction sites. Large architectural pieces were carefully shaped elsewhere, then brought into the city and assembled according to the master design plans. A Jesuit priest named Father Antonio Montserrat later described the process in his writings. He noted that Akbar organized construction with impressive efficiency, ensuring that workers followed exact architectural measurements while different parts of the buildings were prepared separately and fitted together later. Miniature paintings from the Mughal period also suggest that Akbar took a direct personal interest in the work being done at Fatehpur Sikri. Rather than remaining distant from the labor, the emperor often visited construction areas to observe the craftsmen and stone workers closely. Some historical accounts even describe Akbar participating alongside workers at certain moments, showing unusual involvement for a ruler of such power. This reflected not only his fascination with architecture, but also his determination to personally shape the identity of his new imperial city. The design of Fatehpur Sikri blended Persian planning with strong Indian artistic influence. Massive gateways, open courtyards, carved pillars, domed pavilions, and symmetrical layouts all combined into a city that represented both imperial authority and cultural fusion. At the center of this architectural vision stood structures inspired by balance, geometry, and visual harmony, principles that would later influence some of the greatest Mughal monuments in history. Even Humayun's tomb, with its grand dome, elegant arches, and formal gardens, had already demonstrated the direction Mughal architecture was moving toward. Many historians consider it one of the earliest monuments to introduce ideas that would eventually reach their peak in the construction of the Taj Mahal. For Akbar, however, Fatehpur Sikri was more than a capital city. It was a statement of power, faith, artistic ambition, and the beginning of a new Mughal architectural era. The construction of Fatehpur Sikri advanced at an extraordinary pace for such a massive imperial city. Historical records suggest that the entire walled capital, famous for its 9 grand gateways, was completed in roughly 7 years, an astonishing achievement for the 16th century. One reason for this speed may have been the advanced construction methods used by Akbar's builders. Large sandstone sections were carved and prepared in separate workshops before being transported to the city and assembled according to carefully measured architectural plans. Inside the fortified walls stood an enormous imperial complex designed to serve every need of the Mughal court. The city contained royal halls, military barracks, mosques, gardens, noble residences, workshops, bathhouses, and even a royal mint where imperial coins were produced. At the center of the palace complex stood the famous Anup Talao, sometimes called the Peerless Pool. The elegant water tank reflected the surrounding sandstone pavilions and became one of the most visually striking spaces inside the capital. The royal harem was heavily protected and designed almost like a fortress within the city itself. Massive gates reinforced with iron studs guarded the entrances, while high walls shielded the private quarters from the outside world. Although secluded, the inner palace was filled with luxury and artistic beauty. Fountains flowed through flower gardens, polished blue roof tiles shimmered under sunlight, and open pavilions allowed cool air to move through the royal apartments during the intense summer heat. One of these airy structures became known as the Hawa Mahal, or Palace of Winds. The interiors reflected a strong blend of Mughal and Indian artistic traditions. Detailed red sandstone carvings decorated walls, balconies, pillars, and connected courtyards throughout the palace complex. Historical descriptions also suggest that Akbar personally enjoyed spending time inside these palace quarters. Through hidden corridors and screened passageways, the emperor could move privately through different sections of the royal residence. Some accounts even describe Akbar playing elaborate games inside the palace. One unusual version of chess reportedly used real human beings as living pieces on a giant board, turning the strategy game into a royal spectacle. Other stories claim the emperor sometimes played hide-and-seek with members of the royal household through the maze-like palace corridors and courtyards. Among the most extraordinary buildings in Fatehpur Sikri was a massive audience hall centered around a richly carved stone pillar. A circular platform stood above the pillar, connected to surrounding galleries by narrow bridges extending outward in multiple directions. Many historians believe Akbar used this chamber for discussions, debates, and meetings with advisors. From the elevated central platform, he could communicate with scholars and officials seated around the balconies. Foreign travelers visiting Mughal India were deeply impressed by both Agra and Fatehpur Sikri. The English merchant Ralph Fitch described them as enormous and crowded cities, comparing their scale to some of the largest urban centers in Europe at the time. Yet despite its grandeur, Fatehpur Sikri remained the imperial capital for only a relatively short period. Beginning around 1585, the city slowly started losing importance and was gradually abandoned as the center of Mughal political power. Historians have debated the exact reasons for centuries. One major problem may have been the limited water supply available to support such a massive population. Another important weakness was geography. Unlike Agra, Fatehpur Sikri was not located beside the Yamuna River, one of the empire's major transportation and trade routes. Without direct river access, communication, supply movement, and commercial activity became more difficult over time. Even so, the abandoned city survived as one of the greatest architectural achievements of Akbar's reign. Its towering gateways, carved sandstone palaces, peaceful courtyards, and silent audience halls still reflect the ambition, creativity, and imperial vision of the Mughal Empire at its height. Akbar's audience chamber at Fatehpur Sikri stood as one of the most extraordinary architectural spaces of the Mughal Empire. Unlike ordinary royal halls, this chamber immediately overwhelmed visitors with its unusual and symbolic design. At the very center rose a gigantic carved sandstone pillar, richly decorated with intricate patterns, layered brackets, and sculpted supports created by master craftsmen. The pillar expanded outward near the top like the branches of a stone tree, holding a circular platform suspended above the hall. Narrow stone bridges stretched from this central platform toward surrounding galleries positioned along the walls. The entire structure looked almost unreal, combining engineering, art, and political symbolism into a single dramatic space. Historians still debate the exact purpose of the chamber, but many believe Akbar used it for private councils, intellectual discussions, and meetings with advisors, philosophers, nobles, and religious scholars from many backgrounds. When important discussions took place, Akbar would reportedly sit upon the elevated circular platform while officials and scholars gathered around the balconies connected by the bridges. Physically and symbolically, the emperor stood at the center of every conversation. The architecture itself reflected Akbar's larger vision for his empire, a blending of cultures, traditions, and artistic styles. Persian symmetry mixed with Indian craftsmanship, creating a structure unlike anything built before it. By the middle of the 1580s, Akbar had reached the height of his authority and influence. Now in his 40s, he ruled over a rapidly expanding empire and had become known far beyond India. Merchants, travelers, diplomats, Priests and scholars arriving at the Mughal court often wrote detailed descriptions of the emperor because his personality left such a strong impression upon them. Foreign visitors described Akbar as a man with broad shoulders, powerful posture, and natural royal confidence. One particularly interesting detail repeatedly mentioned was the shape of his legs. Years of constant horseback riding had slightly curved them outward, giving him the appearance of a lifelong warrior and an exceptionally experienced horseman. Rather than diminishing his image, this feature strengthened it. His body reflected the harsh physical life of a ruler who had spent years riding across battlefields, deserts, forests, and distant provinces beside his armies. Observers also noted the calm expression that usually rested upon his face. Akbar often appeared thoughtful, composed, and deeply attentive while speaking with others. Whether addressing nobles, soldiers, scholars, or foreign visitors, he carried himself with unusual patience and self-control. Many travelers were surprised by how approachable the emperor could seem during public audiences. Unlike rulers who hid completely behind layers of ceremony and fear, Akbar often allowed direct interaction with people from many social backgrounds. Yet those same accounts also described a far more intimidating side of the emperor. Although calm most of the time, Akbar's anger was said to transform the atmosphere of an entire room. Witnesses wrote that when he became enraged, his presence grew overwhelming and terrifying. Conversations would stop instantly. Nobles lowered their eyes. Even experienced courtiers reportedly feared provoking him during moments of royal fury. His calm dignity could suddenly turn into a powerful display of authority that reminded everyone they stood before the ruler of one of the world's greatest empires. This balance between kindness and fear became one of the foundations of Akbar's rule. He understood that a king could not rely only on military strength. Public image, discipline, and emotional control were equally important tools of power. Akbar carefully shaped how people saw him. He welcomed petitions from ordinary citizens and often listened personally to complaints and requests. Travelers described him as polite in conversation and surprisingly respectful toward people of different religions and social classes. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, merchants, nobles, soldiers, and foreign priests all appeared within the diverse world of his court. At the same time, Akbar also understood the importance of maintaining royal distance. Some historical accounts mention that he occasionally pretended not to notice certain admirers or common people attempting to gain his attention during public appearances. This behavior was not simply arrogance. It was part of a carefully controlled royal image. Akbar knew that if a ruler became too familiar or too accessible, the mystery and authority of kingship could weaken. By remaining slightly distant, he protected the aura of imperial power surrounding the throne. Even so, many observers still considered him unusually humane for a ruler of his era. He accepted humble gifts from ordinary citizens with visible appreciation, sometimes valuing them more emotionally than the expensive offerings brought by wealthy nobles seeking political favor. He often preferred intelligent discussion over empty ceremony and surrounded himself with scholars, poets, historians, philosophers, and religious thinkers from across the empire and beyond. One of the most fascinating contradictions about Akbar involved education. Although his royal libraries eventually contained thousands of rare manuscripts and beautifully bound books, some accounts claim the emperor himself never fully mastered reading and writing in the traditional scholarly sense. Yet despite this, he developed extraordinary knowledge through constant discussion, listening, observation, and debate. His court became one of the intellectual centers of the Mughal world, where ideas from different cultures and religions were exchanged openly. For many historians, this combination of military discipline, political intelligence, architectural ambition, curiosity, and psychological understanding made Akbar one of history's most remarkable rulers. And nowhere reflected that vision more powerfully than Fatehpur Sikri, the magnificent imperial city where architecture, politics, philosophy, royal theater, and personal authority all came together under the rule of a single emperor determined to shape the future of his empire. Akbar's intelligence impressed nearly everyone who entered the Mughal court. Even without the traditional education expected from many rulers of his time, foreign visitors often wrote that his conversations revealed extraordinary wisdom, sharp political understanding, and deep curiosity about the wider world. His openness toward travelers, scholars, priests, and foreigners gave the Mughal court a reputation unlike any other royal court of the 16th century. Among the many outsiders who arrived at Fatehpur Sikri during Akbar's reign was a Persian nobleman named Mirza Ghiyas Beg. In 1577, Ghiyas Beg entered Mughal territory searching for survival and opportunity. Although highly educated and refined, he had fallen into poverty in Persia. Hoping to rebuild his fortune through service in Akbar's empire, he left his homeland together with his heavily pregnant wife and young children. The journey toward India was harsh and dangerous. The family traveled through isolated landscapes, dry wilderness, and unsafe roads filled with thieves and uncertainty. For protection, they joined a traveling caravan moving toward Mughal lands. Yet even this precaution could not fully protect them from disaster. While still in Persian territory, bandits attacked the caravan and robbed the family of nearly everything they possessed. Most of their belongings disappeared, leaving them exhausted, frightened, and dependent upon only 2 weak pack animals to continue the journey. Despite these hardships, the family pushed forward toward India. Near Kandahar, during this difficult migration, Ghiyas Beg's wife gave birth to a baby girl. The child was named Mehrunisa, a name often translated as "son among women." Soon after her birth, stories surrounding the infant began turning into legend. According to several accounts recorded later by chroniclers, the desperate parents briefly feared the newborn would not survive the brutal conditions of the journey. One famous version of the story claims the infant was left beneath a tree for a short time while the devastated family moved onward in despair. But the father could not abandon his child. Filled with panic and guilt, Ghiyas Beg rushed back toward the tree where the infant had been left behind. As he approached, he witnessed a startling sight, a large black serpent sitting coiled protectively beside the baby. The snake remained near the child as though guarding her. Then, as the frightened father moved closer, the serpent slowly uncoiled itself and silently slipped away into the wilderness, leaving the infant completely unharmed. Whether entirely factual or partly shaped into legend over time, the story became permanently connected to Mehrunisa's future identity and destiny. The child survived those uncertain first hours of life and continued the difficult journey with her family into Mughal territory. Eventually they arrived at Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar's magnificent imperial capital. As was customary for educated and well-connected foreigners entering the Mughal court, Mirza Ghiyas Beg was formally presented before Emperor Akbar. The Persian noble quickly impressed the emperor and members of the royal administration through his intelligence, polished speech, and refined personality. He had inherited much of his eloquence and education from his father, who had once served as the chief minister of Isfahan, one of Persia's great cultural cities, and was also widely respected as an accomplished poet. This distinguished family background helped strengthen Ghiyas Beg's reputation within the Mughal court. In addition, several relatives from his extended family had already entered Mughal service successfully, making it easier for him to establish himself within Akbar's growing empire. Yet nobody at court could have imagined how important this struggling refugee family would eventually become. The tiny child born during that dangerous journey, the same infant connected to the story of the Black Serpent, would later rise to extraordinary influence inside the Mughal Empire. Mehrunisa eventually became a Mughal empress, gaining immense authority through intelligence, political skill, and powerful influence within the royal court. Her presence would shape imperial politics, royal decisions, and the future direction of the empire itself. Her family's rise continued into the next generation as well. In time, her grandson would ascend the Mughal throne, permanently tying the once impoverished refugee family to the highest levels of imperial power in Mughal history. What began as a desperate migration across dangerous wilderness ultimately became one of the most remarkable family journeys in the history of the Mughal Empire. Mirza Ghiyath Beg's journey inside the Mughal Empire began humbly. Emperor Akbar initially granted him only a modest administrative position and later appointed him as treasurer of Kabul, one of the empire's important northern outposts. Though the role carried responsibility, Ghiyath Beg was still far from the highest ranks of imperial power. Quietly and patiently, however, he earned respect through intelligence, discipline, and loyalty. His abilities eventually drew greater attention from the Mughal court. In 1596, Akbar placed Ghiyath Beg in charge of the imperial court buildings in Agra, an important responsibility connected to the empire's architectural and administrative center. The appointment marked a major turning point in his rise within the Mughal hierarchy and brought his family closer to the heart of imperial influence. During these years, Ghiyath Beg's daughter, Mehrunisa, matured into one of the most admired women associated with the Mughal court. She was known not only for extraordinary beauty but also for intelligence, artistic refinement, and a lively personality that stood out among noblewomen of her time. Contemporary descriptions praised her accomplishments in music, poetry, painting, and elegant courtly traditions. Yet her character possessed another quality that made her memorable: she was sharp-minded and satirical. Mehrunisa was known for quick wit, clever observations, and a playful sense of humor that sometimes carried subtle mockery or irony. This lively and spirited nature made her presence captivating inside elite social circles. At around 17 years of age, Mehrunisa was married to a distinguished Persian soldier who had earned fame during Akbar's military campaigns. Because of his courage in battle, he later received the title Sher Afghan, meaning Tiger Slayer. The marriage elevated the status of her family even further and tied her future to a respected military household within the empire. As years passed, stories began circulating regarding Prince Salim, Akbar's son and the future Emperor Jahangir. According to some later chroniclers, Salim first noticed Mehrunisa during a royal court custom in which noblewomen and respected families appeared before the prince while remaining partially veiled according to imperial etiquette. Several accounts describe a moment in which Mehrunisa danced before Prince Salim during one of these courtly gatherings. Her elegance, confidence, and charm reportedly left a powerful impression on the young prince. Some romanticized versions even claimed that during the performance her veil slipped accidentally, and Salim became instantly captivated by her beauty. Whether these stories reflected reality or later legend remains uncertain, because many versions were written long after the events themselves. Still, the tale became deeply connected to Mughal history and later court traditions. Some writers claimed that Emperor Akbar became aware of Salim's growing fascination and chose not to interfere with Meronisa's already arranged marriage because he considered it unjust to break an honorable agreement. According to these accounts, Akbar refused to commit what he viewed as an act of injustice merely to satisfy the prince's desires. This interpretation portrayed Akbar as a ruler guided strongly by fairness and imperial ethics rather than personal emotion. Other historians, however, questioned whether Salim's feelings had truly developed before her marriage at all. Because the surviving accounts often contradict one another, the complete truth remains difficult to determine. Life within the Mughal harem itself was extremely restricted and heavily guarded. The inner royal quarters were protected not only by eunuchs but also by powerful female guards trained to maintain strict security around the imperial women. Access to these secluded palace sections was tightly controlled, and adult men were generally forbidden from entering them unless they possessed the highest authority. As the daughter of a trusted court official, Meronisa would likely have attended royal gatherings among noblewomen inside these guarded palace spaces. Moving through perfumed halls, silk-covered chambers, and carefully protected corridors, she became increasingly familiar with the sophisticated world of Mughal royalty. Meanwhile, Prince Salim already possessed several political marriages arranged to strengthen alliances throughout Akbar's empire. These unions were meant to secure loyalty between noble families and regional powers rather than fulfill personal love or emotion. Even so, the story of Salim and Meronisa continued to survive in whispers, court rumors, and historical memory, eventually becoming one of the most discussed relationships in Mughal history. During the later years of Emperor Akbar's rule, the Mughal Empire was already preparing the generation that would eventually inherit one of the richest and most powerful dynasties in the world. Prince Salim, the emperor's son and future ruler known as Jahangir, had entered several political marriages during his youth in order to strengthen alliances across northern India. When Salim was only 15 years old, he married Manbai, the daughter of the Hindu ruler of Amber, the kingdom connected to present-day Jaipur. In the year 1587, she gave birth to Salim's first son, Prince Khusrau. 2 years later, in 1589, Salim's second son, Prince Parvez, was born to another Muslim royal wife within the Mughal household. Yet it was the birth of Salim's third son that would eventually become one of the most historically significant moments in Mughal history. On January 5, 1592, in the city of Lahore, a son was born to Salim and the Rajput princess Jodhbai of Marwar, the royal region associated with present-day Jodhpur. Jodhbai was admired throughout the court for her intelligence, elegance, and graceful personality. The arrival of her child immediately attracted enormous attention inside the imperial palace. Court astrologers carefully studied the skies on the night of the prince's birth and declared the event highly auspicious. According to several royal chroniclers, the alignment of the planets resembled the celestial conditions said to have surrounded the birth of Timur, the legendary conqueror from whom the Mughal emperors traced their ancestry. The timing appeared extraordinary for several other reasons as well. The prince was born during the 1000th year of the Islamic calendar, a moment many scholars considered spiritually important. Historians also noted that the month of his birth matched the sacred month traditionally associated with the Prophet Muhammad. These coincidences caused many members of the Mughal court to believe that the newborn child was destined for greatness from the very beginning of his life. Emperor Akbar himself was deeply delighted by the birth of this grandson. The emperor gave the boy the name Khurram, a Persian word meaning joyous, or one who brings happiness. The name reflected the excitement and affection that surrounded the prince during his earliest days. Akbar's attachment to the child quickly became noticeable throughout the royal court, and many nobles observed that the emperor treated Khurram with unusual warmth and favor. The young prince who received such attention in childhood would later rise to the Mughal throne under a far more famous name, Shah Jahan, the emperor who would eventually build the Taj Mahal, one of the most celebrated monuments in world history. Around the same period, another important child was born into a different branch of the Mughal court. The Persian nobleman Ghiyas Beg, who had once entered India as a struggling migrant before rising through imperial service, celebrated the birth of a granddaughter in his family. The baby girl was born to one of his sons, making Ghiyas Beg her grandfather. She was given the name Arjuman Banu Begum. At the time, nobody inside the empire could have imagined how closely the destinies of young Khurram and Arjuman Banu would eventually become connected. As Arjuman Banu grew older, she became admired for her beauty, intelligence, refinement, and noble manners. In later years, history would remember her by the title Mumtaz Mahal, meaning, chosen one of the palace. She would become the beloved wife of Shah Jahan and the woman whose memory inspired the construction of the Taj Mahal itself. Her story would eventually become one of the most emotional and legendary romances associated with the Mughal Empire. After her untimely death, Shah Jahan's grief transformed her memory into something eternal. Through the white marble monument raised in her honor, Mumtaz Mahal became forever linked with the image of love, loss, and imperial splendor. Following Mughal custom, young Prince Khurram was placed under the care of one of Akbar's senior royal wives shortly after birth. The woman was childless, deeply religious, and also connected to the Mughal family line through Akbar's relatives. Meanwhile, Jodh Bai, the prince's mother, was comforted and honored with magnificent royal gifts that included precious rubies, pearls, and valuable jewels. Khurram's formal education began according to an elaborate imperial tradition. When he reached the exact age of 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days, the Mughal court, the young Prince Khurram continued to grow under the careful eye of his grandfather Akbar, who personally guided many parts of the boy's early life. In keeping with Akbar's own uncertain feelings toward certain royal traditions, some historians later suggested that Khurram may never have gone through the formal circumcision ceremony that was common among Mughal princes of the era. As the prince grew older, Akbar believed that royal education could not remain limited to books, poetry, and courtly manners alone. A future Mughal noble needed strength, discipline, courage, and mastery over weapons. For this reason, Akbar himself introduced Khurram to hunting and military training while he was still very young. When Khurram was only 6 years old, Akbar took the child with him on a military campaign. The emperor appointed an experienced rider, marksman, and swordsman to personally train the young prince during the journey. Even at such a young age, Khurram was expected to observe the realities of imperial life beyond palace walls. During that campaign, the boy faced one of his earliest tests of courage. Khurram fired his first weapon at a leopard and managed to wound the animal. The incident became an early sign of the prince's growing confidence and fearlessness in dangerous situations. Not long afterward, Khurram fell ill with smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases of the time. The illness frightened the imperial household, but the young prince survived without permanent damage, bringing enormous relief to Akbar, who deeply loved his grandson. By the age of 9, Khurram had already begun entering the political world of the Mughal Empire. Akbar invited the young prince to sit among members of his war council, allowing him to witness discussions of campaigns, strategy, and imperial affairs at an age when most children were still far from public responsibility. Akbar's affection toward Khurram became widely noticed inside the court. Many observers believed the emperor showed even greater warmth toward his grandson than he had once shown toward his own son, Prince Salim. Salim himself later remembered how Akbar constantly praised Khurram and sometimes referred to the boy as his true son. The famous court historian Abul Fazl also observed the unusual closeness between Akbar and the prince. He remarked that the emperor appeared to love his grandsons even more deeply than his own children. Khurram, as a child, had become one of the most cherished young figures inside the royal harem and palace quarters. From an early age, the prince displayed remarkable skill in physical activities. Hunting, martial exercises, and military arts fascinated him, and Akbar took pride in every sign of courage or discipline shown by the boy. By the time Khurram reached the age of 12, he had already been given command over a military detachment and had accompanied Akbar on campaign journeys. Yet the growing closeness between Akbar and Khurram also created tension within the imperial family. As Prince Salim matured into adulthood, Akbar's affection toward him appeared to weaken. Some people within the court believed the aging emperor had become troubled by what he saw as Salim's restless ambition and hunger for power. Certain foreign visitors and later Mughal writers hinted at deeper rivalries within the palace. An English merchant named William Finch later recorded rumors of conflict and jealousy surrounding Prince Salim and Akbar's court. According to some stories, Salim became emotionally attached to one of Akbar's favored concubines, and when the emperor learned of the affair, severe punishment followed within the palace walls. Salim's insecurity continued to grow. Although he was Akbar's eldest surviving son, Mughal succession did not always follow. Strict rules where the oldest son automatically inherited the throne. Because of this uncertainty, Salim could never feel completely secure about his future. Fearing that distance from the capital might weaken his claim to power, Salim sometimes refused to lead distant military expeditions. He worried that if Akbar died while he was far away, rivals inside the empire might seize control before he could return to claim authority. Akbar, meanwhile, gradually began showing favor toward Salim's younger brothers Murad and Daniel, even though both princes had developed serious drinking habits that troubled many within the court. Salim himself also became increasingly drawn toward alcohol. Historical accounts describe how, at the age of 18, he first tasted sweet yellow wine. He later admitted that he immediately enjoyed both the flavor and the sensation it created within him. Over time, drinking slowly became a regular part of his life inside the Mughal court. By his late 20s, Prince Salim's addiction had become impossible to ignore. Day after day, he consumed nearly 20 phials of double-distilled spirits. His body weakened rapidly, and his meals became painfully small, often nothing more than bread and radishes. The constant drinking destroyed his health. Violent hangovers left him exhausted, and his hands shook so badly that he could no longer even hold a glass properly. Court physicians were forced to help him drink. The royal doctors warned him with frightening honesty. If he did not stop, he might be dead within 6 months. Frightened by the warning, Salim reduced the amount. Instead of 20 phials, he limited himself to 6 cups of wine mixed with spirits, along with 14 grains of opium each day. But the damage had already reached deep into his mind and temperament. The reduction did little to calm his anger, and it did not make him any more forgiving toward what he believed was his father Akbar's neglect. In the year 1601, resentment finally turned into rebellion. Salim's revolt, however, appeared uncertain and directionless. Rather than launching a direct attack, he wandered from place to place with a force of nearly 30,000 men while cautiously calling himself emperor. Father and son both seemed unwilling to enter an open war against one another. Instead, Salim focused his anger on Abul Fazl, Akbar's famous chronicler, advisor, and one of the emperor's closest companions. By this time, Abul Fazl had also become one of Akbar's most successful generals and was away on campaign. The closeness between Akbar and Abul Fazl was legendary inside the Mughal court. One strange incident from a royal hunt was remembered for years afterward. During the hunt, Akbar was struck violently by an animal in his private parts. Abul Fazl later wrote proudly that the responsibility of applying the healing ointment had fallen to the writer of this book of fortune. By 1602, Akbar had become deeply disturbed by the growing unrest and ordered Abul Fazl to return quickly to Agra. Salim, however, deeply distrusted the scholar general. In his own memoirs, he later admitted that Abul Fazl was no friend of mine. Determined to remove him, Salim secretly planned his assassination. As Abul Fazl hurried back toward the emperor's court, he was attacked and murdered by a local Raja who had reportedly been promised a reward for stopping and killing the emperor's trusted advisor. According to several accounts, Salim demanded that Abul Fazl's severed head be sent to him in triumph. Some stories even claim the prince ordered the head thrown into a common latrine, a brutal act revealing the depth of his hatred. Akbar learned of the murder while calmly spending time with his tame pigeons. The news shattered him. The aging emperor collapsed in grief and anguish, but punishing Salim had become dangerously complicated. Murad was already dead, reportedly after suffering delirium tremens. Daniel, meanwhile, was slowly drinking himself toward death. Akbar desperately tried to keep alcohol away from him, but Daniel's followers secretly smuggled wine past imperial spies by hiding it inside cows' intestines wrapped beneath their clothing. Facing the collapse of his family and dynasty, Akbar slowly realized that despite everything that had happened, reconciliation with Salim might now be unavoidable. Prince Salim's dependence on alcohol had now reached a terrifying stage. By the time he was in his late 20s, he was consuming nearly 20 phials of double-distilled spirits every single day. His body survived on an extremely poor diet of bread and radishes, while constant hangovers slowly destroyed his strength. The addiction became so severe that his hands shook uncontrollably. The trembling grew so bad that he could no longer hold a drinking glass by himself, forcing court physicians to assist him. The royal doctors warned him with brutal honesty. If he failed to stop drinking, he might not survive another 6 months. Frightened by the warning, Salim attempted to reduce his intake, but only partially. He lowered his consumption to 6 cups of wine mixed with spirits and 14 grains of opium each day. Even then, the effort remained incomplete. The reduction did little to calm his violent temper or ease the bitterness he continued to feel toward what he saw as his father's neglect. In 1601, that resentment finally erupted into rebellion. Salim gathered a military force of nearly 30,000 men and wandered restlessly from place to place, marching aimlessly across the region while cautiously allowing himself to be called emperor. Despite the growing tension, both father and son still appeared reluctant to enter direct war against one another. Instead of openly attacking Akbar, Salim directed his hostility toward one of the emperor's closest companions, Abul Fazl. The scholar, historian, and royal chronicler had become one of Akbar's most trusted advisors and successful generals. Their relationship was famously close. One incident from a royal hunting expedition demonstrated that closeness clearly. During the hunt, Akbar was violently gored in his testicles by a wild animal. Later, Abul Fazl proudly wrote that the responsibility of applying ointment to the emperor's wound had been entrusted to the writer of this book of fortune. By this time, the 50-year-old Abul Fazl had risen far beyond scholarship and had become one of the empire's leading military commanders. When the rebellion disturbed Akbar deeply enough, the emperor ordered Abul Fazl to return quickly to Agra. But Salim had long distrusted the soldier-scholar. In his own memoirs, he later admitted that Abul Fazl was no friend of mine. Determined to remove him permanently, Salim secretly planned his assassination. As Abul Fazl hurried back toward the emperor's side, he was intercepted and murdered by a local Raja who had reportedly been promised a reward if he succeeded in killing the sedition monger. According to several accounts, the killing did not satisfy Salim's anger. After the murder, Abul Fazl's severed head was allegedly delivered to Salim in triumph, and the prince ordered it thrown into a common latrine. Akbar learned about the assassination while peacefully playing with his tame pigeons. The news devastated him. Overcome with grief and anguish, the emperor collapsed. Yet despite his sorrow and fury, the situation around him had become dangerously complicated. Murad was already dead, reportedly consumed by delirium tremens. Daniel, meanwhile, was slowly drinking himself toward death as well. Akbar desperately tried to keep alcohol away from his surviving son, but the prince's followers continued smuggling wine past the emperor's spies in shocking ways. They filled cows' intestines with alcohol and wrapped them beneath their clothes to secretly carry drink into Daniel's presence. Surrounded by rebellion, addiction, betrayal, illness, and the weakening stability of his own dynasty, Akbar gradually realized that reconciliation with Salim might be the only remaining path left to preserve the Mughal throne. The Mughal court had become a place of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Inside the palace, rivalries between princes were no longer hidden whispers. Every faction watched the imperial succession closely, knowing that the aging Emperor Akbar was weakening with every passing day. Khurram, still young, quietly observed the dangerous politics unfolding around him. Lessons of power, survival, and royal rivalry surrounded the prince from every direction. But despite the tension between his father Salim and the imperial court, Khurram's loyalty toward Akbar remained deeply emotional and personal. Then came another devastating moment inside the palace. Only a week after the violent elephant fight, Emperor Akbar suddenly became gravely ill. Severe diarrhea and internal bleeding weakened the old emperor rapidly. The atmosphere inside the royal chambers turned heavy with panic and grief. Khurram refused to leave Akbar's bedside. Day and night, the young prince remained near the emperor, unwilling to step away even for a moment. According to those around him, Khurram declared emotionally, "So long as there is a breath of life in Shah Baba, nothing can induce me to leave him." While Akbar struggled between life and death, political calculations continued across the empire. Salim and his half-brothers quietly prepared themselves for the battle over succession. Powerful nobles gathered to decide who should inherit the throne. Some favored the younger Khusrau, while others believed the more experienced Salim was the safer choice for the stability of the empire. The nobles feared that a divided succession could throw the Mughal Empire into civil war. In the end, most of the leading nobles supported Salim. Akbar, weak and dying, accepted their judgment. Inside the dim imperial chamber, the emperor gave one final symbolic order. He instructed Salim to wear the imperial robes and turban. He also ordered him to gird on Humayun's sword, which hung near the foot of the bed. The act was quiet, but its meaning was enormous. The succession had been decided. Only a few hours later, on the 15th of October 1605, Emperor Akbar died at the age of 63. Silence spread through the palace. At dawn, Akbar's body was placed upon a bier and carried toward Sikandra, 5 miles from Agra. There stood the grand tomb complex that Akbar himself had begun building, though it was still unfinished. The empire mourned the death of the ruler who had transformed Mughal power across the Indian subcontinent. Under Akbar's rule, the empire had grown into a massive and diverse dominion containing nearly 100 million subjects from different ethnic and religious communities. He had expanded and stabilized territories that had once seemed fragile under Humayun. Akbar understood that conquering land was easier than governing it. Because of this, he reorganized and centralized the empire's administration into a disciplined imperial system. His wealth and authority became legendary. Huge imperial armies marched under his banners, while royal treasuries overflowed with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and pearls. The Mughal court itself became known for luxury, refinement, sophistication, and monumental architecture that announced the empire's permanence to the world. Among the descendants of Timur, Akbar had proven himself the most capable and politically astute ruler of them all. Many considered him fully worthy of the title. The Great. 9 days after Akbar's death, the 36-year-old Salim was formally proclaimed emperor inside the hall of public audience in Agra Fort. There, he adopted a new royal name, Jahangir. The name meant, Caesar of the world, and according to Jahangir himself, the duty of kings was simple: to control the world. But the Mughal Empire was still far from peace. Akbar was gone, Jahangir had taken the throne, and the battle for power inside the royal family had only just begun. In Part 5, the story grows even darker, with betrayal, ambition, and the rise of a new Mughal era. Like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next chapter.